The summer heat of 1878 beat down on the dusty town of Cedar Ridge like a hammer on an anvil. The railroad depot sat at the edge of town, its wooden platform baking under the relentless Texas sun. Tumbleweeds rolled past the tracks, and the only sound was the distant lowing of cattle and the occasional whistle of wind through the gaps in the station. House walls, Samuel Mackenzie pulled his wagon up to the loading dock with practiced ease. At nearly 7 feet tall and built like an oak tree, Sam was hard to miss in any crowd. His hands, scarred from years of ranch work, gripped the reins with gentle firmness. The horses knew their master well and settled into place without fuss. Sam had been making this monthly trip to collect supplies for his ranch for over 10 years now, and the routine never changed much. The depot master, a thin man named Patterson, hurried over with his usual nervous energy. "Morning, Sam. Got your order ready in the back? Took some doing to get that barbed wire you wanted, but it finally came in on yesterday's train." Sam nodded and began walking toward the freight shed, his boots creating small clouds of dust with each step. That's when he noticed the crowd gathered near the passenger platform. About 15 people stood in a loose circle, their voices carrying on the still air. Something about their posture told Sam this wasn't the usual friendly chatter that happened. When the train brought visitors to town, as he got closer, he could make out individual voices. Old Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house was speaking in her sharp, clipped tone. "I tell you, it's not natural. A savage just sitting there like she owns the place?" "Someone should do something," added Tom Bradley, who ran the hardware store. "Can't have her kind just wandering around loose. Makes decent folks nervous." Sam pushed through the small crowd, using his size to part the group without being rough about it. In the center of their attention sat a young woman on one of the wooden benches that lined the platform. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with long black hair that hung in 2 braids over her shoulders. Her dress was made in the traditional Comanche style, with intricate beadwork along the sleeves, though it was now torn in several places and covered with trail dust. She sat perfectly still, her back straight and her hands folded over a small bundle of belongings in her lap. Her dark eyes moved constantly, watching the faces around her with the alertness of someone who had learned to read danger in every situation. Despite being surrounded by hostile strangers, she showed no fear. There was something almost regal about the way she held herself. "Found her about 3 miles up the tracks this morning," Patterson was explaining to anyone who would listen. Railroad crew spotted her walking along the rails like she was heading somewhere specific. Brought her here because they didn't know what else to do with her. "Probably got separated from one of them raiding parties," suggested Frank Morrison, whose ranch bordered the reservation lands to the west. "Military's been pushing them pretty hard lately. Heard tell there was some trouble up near Fort Griffin last week." Sam studied the woman more carefully. Her clothes weren't war paint and feathers like the wild stories people told about Comanche raiders. This was someone's daughter, someone's wife, maybe. The beadwork on her dress showed skill and care, the kind of time and attention that spoke of a peaceful life, not a warrior's path. "What's she got in that bundle?" asked Bradley, pointing at the package she held so carefully. "Nobody's looked," Patterson replied. "She won't let go of it, and honestly, I wasn't about to try taking it from her." The conversation took a darker turn when 2 men Sam didn't recognize pushed forward. They had the look of drifters, the kind who moved from town to town looking for trouble or easy money. The taller one, with a beard that hadn't seen soap in weeks, grinned in a way that made Sam's jaw tighten. "I say we teach her some manners," the bearded man said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Show her how civilized folks expect to be treated." His companion, shorter but with mean eyes, nodded eagerly. "Yeah, can't have savages thinking they can just waltz into decent towns whenever they please." A few people in the crowd murmured agreement, but Sam noticed that most of the townspeople looked uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. These weren't bad people, just scared ones. The frontier was still wild enough that everyone had heard stories about Indian raids. Even if most of them had never seen one themselves, the young woman seemed to understand the mood shifting around her. Her grip tightened on her bundle, and Sam saw her glance toward the open prairie beyond the train tracks. She was calculating distances. Looking for escape routes? Smart. Sam had learned some Comanche words over the years from trading with peaceful bands that came through the territory. It wasn't much, but it might be enough. He stepped closer to the bench, and the woman's eyes snapped to his face. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "Ayana," he said quietly, using one of the few Comanche words he knew well. It meant eternal blossom, and he had learned it from an old trader who said it was a name of respect. The woman's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected to hear her language spoken here, especially not by this giant of a man who could have easily intimidated her, but instead spoke with unexpected gentleness. Sam tried his few words of Spanish, which sometimes worked as a bridge. "Language on the frontier." "No harm," he said slowly. "Safe." Behind him, the bearded drifter was getting impatient. "Come on, boys, let's show this squaw how things work around here." That was enough. Sam turned around slowly, his full height and broad shoulders creating an imposing silhouette against the afternoon sun. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who was used to being obeyed. "There won't be any trouble here today." The bearded man looked up at Sam and hesitated. Up close, the rancher was even more intimidating than he had appeared from a distance. His arms were thick as fence posts, and his hands looked like they could crush a man's skull without much effort. But the drifter had his pride and his companion to think about. "This ain't your business, mister. Just some savage that needs to learn her place." Sam took one step forward, and suddenly the space between them seemed very small. "I'm making it my business." The shorter drifter tugged at his friend's sleeve. "Come on, Jake, ain't worth it." But Jake was committed now, his hand moving toward the knife on his belt. "Don't matter how big you are, still just one man." Sam didn't reach for his own weapon. Instead, he simply stood there, calm and unmovable as a mountain. "You boys might want to think about this real careful. I know every rancher and sheriff within 50 miles of here. You hurt that woman, and you'll have nowhere to run that I can't find you." The threat was delivered in the same quiet tone Sam might use to discuss the weather, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. Jake looked around the crowd and realized that none of the townspeople were going to back his play. They might not like having a Comanche woman in their midst, but they respected Sam Mackenzie and his word. "This ain't over," Jake muttered, but he was already backing away. "Yes, it is," Sam replied simply. The two drifters pushed through the crowd and disappeared around the corner of the station house. The remaining townspeople began to drift away as well, the excitement over. Within a few minutes, only Sam, the woman, and Patterson remained on the platform. Sam turned back to the young woman and extended his massive hand, palm up in a gesture of peace. "You're coming with me," he said, not as a command but as a promise. She looked at his hand for a long moment, then up at his face. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she carefully shifted her bundle to one arm and placed her other hand in his. Her fingers were small and delicate compared to his, but he could feel the calluses that spoke of hard work and a life lived close to the land. As Sam helped her to her feet, Patterson cleared his throat nervously. "Sam, you sure about this?" "People are going to talk." Sam looked down at the depot master with a slight smile. "People always talk, Patterson. Question is whether you're living your life or theirs." He guided the woman toward his wagon, moving slowly so she wouldn't feel rushed or threatened. As they walked, he noticed how she moved with unconscious grace, her feet finding the quietest path across the wooden planks despite never having been on a train platform before. At the wagon, Sam gestured toward the bench seat, right up front. "With me?" She nodded once and allowed him to help her up. As she settled beside him, Sam noticed she positioned herself so she could see in all directions, still alert for danger even though she had accepted his protection. As they pulled away from the depot, Sam glanced sideways at his unexpected passenger. He had acted on instinct back there, driven by something deeper than logic. Maybe it was the way she had faced down that hostile crowd without showing fear. Maybe it was the skill he could see in the beadwork on her dress, speaking of a culture and traditions that deserved respect rather than hatred, or maybe it was simply that Samuel Mackenzie had spent too many years watching strong people get pushed around by those who mistook cruelty for strength. Whatever the reason, he knew he had made the right choice. The question now was what would come next. The Double Eagle Ranch stretched out before them like a sea of golden grass rolling toward the distant hills. Sam's wagon creaked along the familiar dirt road that led to his homestead, while beside him, Ayanna sat in silence, taking in every detail of this new world she found herself entering. Her dark eyes moved constantly, noting the carefully maintained fences, the scattered groups of cattle bearing Sam's brand, and the wisps of smoke rising from the ranch house chimney in the distance. As they approached the main buildings, Sam could see his crew gathering near the barn. Word traveled fast in ranch country, and he suspected Patterson had already sent word ahead about his unusual passenger. The men stood in a loose group, their faces showing various degrees of curiosity and concern. The first to step forward was Miguel Santos, Sam's foreman and oldest friend on the ranch. Miguel had worked alongside Sam for 8 years ever since. Arriving from Mexico with nothing but the clothes on his back and a reputation as the finest horseman in 3 counties. His weathered face showed the kind of respect that came from years of shared hardship and mutual trust. "Boss," Miguel said with a slight nod, his eyes taking in Ayanna with careful assessment rather than hostility. "Heard you had some excitement in town today." "Nothing we couldn't handle," Sam replied, climbing down from the wagon seat. He moved around to help Ayanna down, offering his hand in the same gentle way he had at the depot. She accepted his assistance but immediately stepped slightly behind him, using his large frame as a shield while she studied the men watching her. The ranch crew was an interesting mix that reflected the changing nature of the frontier. Besides Miguel, there was Joseph Freeman, a former slave who had made his way west after the war and proven himself to be one of the best cattle handlers Sam had ever seen. Standing next to him was Tommy O'Brien, barely 19 years old and full of the kind of energy that made him useful for the more dangerous jobs, like breaking wild horses. Then there was old Pete Williamson, who nobody called anything but old. Pete, though he was probably only 50. Pete had been a buffalo hunter before the herds disappeared, and his knowledge of the land and weather patterns had saved the ranch more than once during harsh winters. Finally, there was Carlos Mendez, Miguel's nephew, who had joined them just last spring and was still learning the ropes. "This is Ayanna," Sam announced to the group, pronouncing her name carefully. "She be staying with us for a while." The men exchanged glances, but nobody spoke up with objections. They had all learned to trust Sam's judgment over the years, even when they didn't immediately understand his reasoning. Miguel stepped forward again, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Ma'am," he said simply, and the others followed suit with nods and quiet greetings. Sam led Ayanna toward a small cabin that sat about 50 yards from the main house. It had been built for his former housekeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who had returned to live with her daughter in Austin the previous winter. The cabin was simple but well built, with a stone fireplace, 2 rooms, and a covered porch that looked out over the horse pastures. "You can stay here," Sam said, opening the door and stepping back to let her look inside. "It's got everything. You need kitchen, bedroom, good water from the well out back." Ayanna stepped into the doorway but didn't enter the cabin. She stood there for several minutes, her eyes moving over the furniture, the curtains on the windows, the oil lamp on the wooden table. Finally, she shook her head and backed away. Sam frowned, wondering if something about the cabin displeased her. Then it occurred to him that she might not be comfortable sleeping enclosed by walls. Many of the Comanche people he had met over the years preferred to sleep under the open sky, finding peace in the vast expanse of stars and the free movement of air around them. "You want to sleep outside?" he asked, gesturing toward the prairie. Ayanna nodded once, then pointed to a spot near the cabin where a large cottonwood tree provided shade during the day. Sam understood and went to fetch some blankets from the cabin, along with a tarp in case of rain. That first evening was awkward for everyone. The ranch hands didn't quite know how to act around their unexpected guest, and Ayana remained mostly silent, observing everything with the careful attention of someone who had learned that survival often depended on understanding new situations. Quickly, dinner was usually a communal affair, with the crew gathering around the long table in the main house kitchen. Sam had always believed that men who worked together should eat together, and the tradition had served to build strong bonds among his diverse group of employees. Tonight, however, he wasn't sure how Ayana would react to being surrounded by strangers in an enclosed space. He solved the problem by bringing a plate of food out to where she had settled under the cottonwood tree. She accepted the meal with a quiet nod, and he noticed how she ate slowly and carefully, tasting each item as if trying to identify unfamiliar flavors. The beef stew and cornbread were probably quite different from traditional Comanche foods. Over the next few days, a routine began to develop. Ayana would rise before dawn, as was her custom, and Sam often found her standing at the edge of the pasture watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and crimson. She seemed to find peace in these quiet moments before the day's work began. Despite the language barrier, she quickly understood the rhythms of ranch life. She watched everything with intelligent eyes, learning how the men worked with the cattle, how they maintained the equipment, and how they organized their daily tasks. By the end of her first week, she had begun helping with small chores around the ranch. It started when she noticed old Pete struggling with a lame horse that had picked up a stone in its hoof. The animal was nervous and difficult to handle, shying away every time Pete tried to lift its leg to examine the problem. Ayana approached slowly, speaking in soft Comanche words that seemed to calm the horse immediately. She ran her hands along the animal's neck and shoulder, her touch so gentle and confident that the horse relaxed completely. Within minutes she had located the stone and removed it, then applied a poultice made from plants she had gathered from the prairie. The improvement in the horse's condition was almost immediate. Word of the incident spread quickly among the crew, and soon they were seeking her help with other animals that seemed beyond traditional remedies. She had a natural understanding of animal behavior that impressed even Miguel, who considered himself an expert horseman, but Ayana's presence at the ranch didn't go unnoticed by the outside world. About 2 weeks after her arrival, a delegation from town appeared at Sam's front door. Leading the group was Pastor Williams from the Cedar Ridge Methodist Church, a tall, stern man who took his role as moral guardian of the community very seriously. Behind the pastor stood Mayor Henderson, 2 members of the town council, and several prominent businessmen. They had clearly come prepared for a serious discussion, and their faces showed the kind of determination that suggested they wouldn't be easily dismissed. Sam met them on his front porch, his imposing figure filling the doorway. He didn't invite them in or offer refreshments, understanding that this was not a social call. "Samuel," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying the authority he used from the pulpit, "we've come to discuss this situation you've created. The whole town is talking about you harboring a heathen woman out here." "Her name is Ayana," Sam replied calmly, "and she's done nothing but honest work since she's been here." Mayor Henderson stepped forward, mopping his brow with a handkerchief despite the cool morning air. "Now, Sam, we're not saying you meant any harm, but you have to understand how this looks to decent folks. A Christian man taking in a savage woman, letting her live on his property without proper supervision. What kind of supervision do you think she needs?" Sam asked, his tone remaining level despite the growing tension. "The church has facilities," Pastor Williams explained. "We can arrange for her to receive proper Christian instruction, teach her civilized ways. There are programs for converting the heathen populations." Sam was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of the men who stood before him. These weren't evil people, he knew. They genuinely believed they were acting in everyone's best interests. But their certainty about what was right and wrong left no room for the possibility that they might be mistaken. "Gentlemen," Sam finally sighed, "I appreciate your concern, but Ayana is under my protection now, and that's how it's going to stay." The delegation left without getting the answer they wanted, but Sam knew this wouldn't be the end of it. He also knew that his decision to protect Ayana would have consequences that reached far beyond his ranch borders. As he watched the visitors ride away, he noticed Ayana standing near the horse corral, her attention focused on a young colt that had been acting sickly for several days. She had been working with the animal, using methods that none of his men understood but that seemed to be helping. Looking at her now, Sam realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, this arrangement had stopped being about simple protection and had become something more complicated. Ayana wasn't just a guest on his ranch anymore. She was becoming part of the place, part of the daily rhythm of life that made the Double Eagle more than just a business. And that Sam understood. 3 months had passed since Ayana arrived at the Double Eagle Ranch, and the autumn air carried the promise of winter in its crisp bite. The cottonwood tree where she slept had turned golden, its leaves dancing in the wind like tiny flames against the deep blue sky. What had started as a temporary arrangement was slowly becoming something neither Sam nor Ayana had expected. Each morning, Sam would find her already awake, sitting quietly beneath her tree and watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. She had developed a routine of gathering plants from the prairie, creating small bundles that she would dry in the shade of the cabin porch. At first, Sam hadn't understood what she was doing, but as time went on, he began to recognize the wisdom in her choices. When old Pete complained of aching joints before storms, Ayana would prepare a tea from willow bark that eased his pain better than anything the town doctor had ever given him. When Tommy's horse developed a persistent cough, she mixed a paste from prairie sage that cleared the animal's breathing within days. Her knowledge seemed to come from generations of accumulated wisdom, passed down through her people like precious family treasures. In return, Sam found himself teaching her things about ranch life that went beyond simple survival. He showed her how to read the sky for weather patterns specific to this part of Texas, how to judge the health of cattle by watching their behavior, and slowly, carefully, how to communicate in English. Their language lessons took place in the evenings, after the day's work was done and the crew had settled in for the night. Sam would sit on the cabin porch while Ayana remained under her tree, the comfortable distance allowing her to feel safe while they worked through basic words and phrases. "Cow," Sam would say, pointing to the pasture where his herd grazed in. The fading light. "Cow," Ayana would repeat, her pronunciation careful and precise. She had a quick mind for languages, and Sam could see her making connections between English words and concepts she already understood. "Water," he continued, gesturing toward the well. "Water," she echoed, then added something in Comanche that sounded like music compared to the harsh consonants of English. These quiet sessions became the best part of Sam's day. There was something peaceful about sitting in the gathering darkness, sharing knowledge across the divide of two very different worlds. Sometimes Ayana would teach him Comanche words in return, her patience with his clumsy pronunciation, showing a gentleness that contrasted with the wariness she still displayed around strangers. But their growing partnership was creating ripples that extended far beyond the ranch boundaries. Sam's monthly trips to town had become increasingly uncomfortable experiences. Conversations would stop when he entered the general store. Old friends would cross the street rather than acknowledge his greeting. The friendly atmosphere he had enjoyed for years was replaced by suspicious glances and whispered comments. The situation came to a head on a particularly difficult trip in late October. Sam had gone to town to arrange for winter supplies and to discuss selling some of his cattle to the railroad company. He was loading feed sacks into his wagon when 3 men approached him from across the street. He recognized them immediately. Jake Turner was the bearded drifter from the depot incident, apparently still in the area despite Sam's assumption that he would have moved on by now. With him were 2 local men Sam knew by reputation rather than friendship. Bill Morrison ran a small spread north of town and had always harbored resentment against more successful ranchers. The third man was Roy Chapman, whose drinking problem had cost him jobs at several local businesses. "Well, look what we got here," Jake said, his voice carrying the false confidence of a man who thought he had backup. The great Sam Mackenzie. Defender of savages? Sam continued loading his wagon, not bothering to acknowledge the comment. Experience had taught him that some confrontations could be avoided by simply refusing to engage, but he could feel tension building in the air like pressure before a thunderstorm. "Heard tell you're running some kind of Indian reservation out there at your place," Bill Morrison added, emboldened by Jake's presence. "Teaching her all kinds of white man's ways, I bet." The implication in his tone made Sam's jaw tighten, but he kept his focus on his work. 2 more feed sacks went into the wagon bed before Roy Chapman decided to escalate things further. "Maybe we should ride out there sometime, see what kind of lessons you've been giving her." That was enough. Sam straightened up slowly, his full height and broad shoulders creating an imposing silhouette against the afternoon sun. When he turned to face the 3 men, his movement was deliberate and controlled, but there was something in his posture that made all 3 of them take an involuntary step backward. "That woman has done nothing but honest work since she's been at my ranch," Sam said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly across the space between them. "She's helped cure sick animals, treated injured men, and caused no trouble for anyone. That's more than I can say for some folks in this town." Jake recovered first, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. Big talk from a man who's forgotten what side he's supposed to be on. Sam didn't move toward his own weapon. Instead, he simply stood there, calm and unmovable as a mountain. "I'm on the side of doing what's right. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. What's right?" Bill Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "What's right is keeping savages where they belong, not treating them like they're civilized people." The conversation might have continued in the same direction, but at that moment, Dr. Hamilton emerged from his office across the street. The elderly physician had been serving the community for over 20 years, and his opinion carried considerable weight with most residents. "Afternoon, Sam," Dr. Hamilton called out, his greeting deliberately friendly and loud enough for everyone to hear. "How's that woman of yours doing? Mrs. Fletcher was telling me yesterday about how she helped with her grandson's fever. Said she used some kind of herbal remedy that worked better than anything I've prescribed in months." The 3 troublemakers looked uncomfortable with this intervention. Dr. Hamilton's endorsement carried more influence than their complaints, and they knew it. "Fine, Doctor," Sam replied. "She's been a real help around the ranch." Dr. Hamilton nodded approvingly. "Wonderful to hear. Traditional healing methods often have merit that we trained physicians sometimes overlook. I'd be interested in learning more about her techniques if she'd be willing to share." With that simple exchange, the doctor had shifted the entire tone of the conversation. What the 3 men had tried to frame as something shameful or suspicious, he had reframed as a valuable community resource. Jake, Bill, and Roy found themselves with nothing more to say. They drifted away, muttering among themselves, but clearly aware that their position had been undermined by someone whose opinion mattered more than theirs. "Thank you," Sam said quietly as Dr. Hamilton approached the wagon. The older man waved away the gratitude. "No need for thanks. I've been hearing good things about her work from several families. Natural healers are rare, and we'd be fools not to appreciate the knowledge she brings." As Sam drove home that afternoon, he reflected on how the incident had revealed the growing divide in the community's attitude toward Ayanna. There were those like Jake and his companions who saw her presence as a threat to their ideas about how the world should work. But there were also people like Dr. Hamilton who recognized the value of her skills and treated her with the respect she deserved. The question was, which group would prove stronger in the long run? Back at the ranch, Sam found Ayanna working with a horse that had been injured in a fall the previous week. She had fashioned a poultice from plants he didn't recognize, and the animal's wounds were healing remarkably well. Miguel stood nearby, watching her work with the kind of professional appreciation that came from years of experience with difficult cases. "She knows things we don't," the foreman said when Sam joined them. "Old ways that work better than the new ones sometimes." Sam nodded, understanding exactly what Miguel meant. There was something deeply satisfying about watching Ayanna work, seeing the confidence in her movements and the obvious results of her efforts. She belonged here, he realized. Not just as someone who needed protection, but as someone who contributed to the life of the ranch in ways that made everyone's existence better. That evening, during their usual language lesson, Ayana surprised him by speaking in nearly perfect English. "Some men in town today were angry with you because of me," she said, her pronunciation careful but clear. Sam looked up, startled by both the quality of her English and her awareness of what had happened. "How did you know about that?" Miguel told me. "He worries for you." She was quiet for a moment, then added, "I do not wish to bring trouble to your life." "You haven't brought trouble," Sam replied firmly. "Some people make their own trouble by refusing to see past their fears." Ayana considered this, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight from the cabin porch. "In my people's way, when someone gives protection, they take on the protected person's burdens as well as their gifts. You have taken on my burdens." "That is not a small thing?" Sam found himself moved by the formality and sincerity of her words. "And what gifts?" he asked gently, for the first time since he had known her. Winter had settled over the Double Eagle Ranch like a heavy blanket, bringing with it shorter days and longer nights around the fire. Snow dusted the prairie in patches, and the cattle huddled together for warmth in the sheltered areas near the barn. Ayana had finally accepted the use of the small cabin during the worst weather. Though she still preferred to sleep outside when the stars were visible, life had found a comfortable rhythm. Ayana's English had improved dramatically, and she could now hold full conversations with Sam and the crew. Her healing skills had become legendary among the neighboring ranches, with people traveling considerable distances to seek her help, with both animals and family members. Even some of the townspeople who had initially been hostile were beginning to change their minds about her value to the community. Sam found himself looking forward to their evening conversations more than he cared to admit. Ayana had a way of seeing the world that challenged his assumptions about life, work, and what really mattered. She spoke of traditions that went back hundreds of years, of connections between people and the land that most settlers never bothered to understand. On this particular morning in February, Sam was working with Miguel to repair a section of fence damaged by winter storms when Tommy O'Brien came riding hard from the eastern pasture. The young man's face was flushed with excitement and worry as he reined in his horse near where they were working. "Boss," Tommy called out, pointing toward the distant hills. "You need to see this. There's riders coming in from the east. Indians. Looks like maybe 8 or 10 of them." Sam felt his stomach tighten. He had always known this moment might come, but somehow he had allowed himself to hope it never would. "How far out?" he asked, setting down his tools. "Maybe an hour at the pace they're traveling. They're not trying to hide themselves, riding right out in the open like they got every right to be here." Miguel and Sam exchanged glances. Both men understood the implications. If hostile tribes were moving through the area, every ranch for 50 miles around could be in danger. But if these were peaceful travelers, shooting first and asking questions, later could start a war that would devastate the entire territory. "Get the men together," Sam told Miguel, "but keep the weapons put away unless I give the word. We don't know what they want yet." As the crew gathered near the main house, Sam went to find Ayana. He discovered her in the cabin, carefully packing her few belongings into the same bundle she had carried when he first found her at the depot. She looked up when he entered, her face calm but her eyes showing the same alertness he had seen that first day. "You heard about the riders," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Tommy's horse was breathing hard when he rode in. "That kind of urgency usually means trouble." She finished folding a piece of beadwork and added it to her bundle. "They are probably looking for me. What makes you think that?" Ayana was quiet for a moment, her hands still as she considered how to explain. "When I was separated from my people, it was during a cavalry patrol that scattered our group. My brother Swift Arrow would not give up searching for me, even if it took months. He is persistent in that way." Sam felt something twist in his chest at the matter-of-fact way she spoke about leaving. "And if it is your brother, then I must go with him. It is the way of our people. Family bonds are not broken by distance or time. What if you don't want to go?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them had been willing to address directly. Ayana looked up at him, and for a moment her careful composure cracked slightly. "What I want and what I must do are not always the same thing," she said quietly. "You have given me protection and kindness when I needed it most. But I cannot hide from my responsibilities forever." Before Sam could respond, Miguel appeared. In the doorway. "Boss, they're closer now. Maybe 30 minutes out. We can see them clearly from the ridge." Sam nodded and followed Miguel outside with Ayana close behind. The crew had gathered in a defensive position that could protect the buildings without appearing overly aggressive. Old Pete had positioned himself near the barn with a clear view of the approaching riders, while Joseph and Carlos took positions that would allow them to protect the horses if things went badly. As the minutes passed, the riders became visible from the ranch house itself. They moved in a loose formation that spoke of military discipline, but their pace was steady rather than aggressive. Leading the group was a tall figure on a paint horse, his long black hair flowing behind him as he rode. When they were close enough to make out individual faces, Ayana stepped forward from where she had been standing behind Sam. Her sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but Sam heard it. "Swift Arrow," she whispered, her voice carrying a mixture of joy and something that might have been dread. The riders approached to within 50 yards of the ranch buildings before stopping. The leader, a man who appeared to be in his late 20s, with the kind of bearing that spoke of natural authority, raised his hand in a gesture that could have been either greeting or command for his followers to halt. For several long moments, the two groups simply looked at each other across the winter grass. Then Ayana stepped forward, moving past Sam and the crew to stand in the open space between the house and the approaching warriors. She called out something in Comanche, her voice carrying clearly in the crisp air. Swift Arrow responded immediately, his tone showing both relief and something sharper that might have been anger. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Ayana occasionally gesturing toward Sam and the ranch buildings. Sam couldn't understand the words, but he could read the emotions playing across both siblings' faces. There was obvious love and relief at being reunited, but also tension about the circumstances of that reunion. Swift Arrow's eyes kept moving to Sam, assessing him with the kind of careful attention a man gives to potential threats. Finally, Ayana turned back toward the ranch. "My brother wishes to speak with the man who has given me shelter," she announced, her English formal and careful in the tense situation. Sam stepped forward, very aware that every eye was on him and that his next words could determine whether this encounter ended peacefully or in bloodshed. "Tell him he's welcome to come closer, but his men will need to keep their weapons peaceful." Ayana translated, and after a brief discussion among the warriors, Swift Arrow rode forward alone. He was an impressive figure, Sam realized, with the kind of quiet confidence that marked him as someone accustomed to command. When he reached the point where he could speak without shouting, he dismounted and approached on foot. "You are the one called Sam Mackenzie," Swift Arrow said in careful but clear English. Sam was surprised by his command of the language, though he supposed he shouldn't have been. Survival on the frontier often required multiple languages. "I am, and you're Ayana's brother." "Yes, I am Swift Arrow of the Comanche people. I have traveled many days searching for my sister." His eyes moved to where Ayana stood, then back to Sam. "She tells me you saved her from harm and gave her shelter through the winter months." "She's been no burden," Sam replied honestly. "She's helped more than she's taken." Swift Arrow studied Sam for a long moment, clearly trying to read the truth behind his words. "My sister also tells me that some of your people have shown her hostility because of what she is. Some have, others have shown her respect. That's the way of it with most things, I suppose. And you? What do you show her?" The question was direct enough that Sam knew his answer would carry weight beyond simple politeness, respect, and friendship. "Swift." Arrow nodded slowly, as if Sam's response confirmed something he had already suspected. "Ayana speaks of you with ... regard. This is unusual for her. She does not trust easily. She's had good reason to be careful." "Yes," Swift Arrow was quiet. for a moment, then continued. I come not just to find my sister, but to bring her home. Our people have need of her skills. There are children who were orphaned in the cavalry attacks, elders who suffer from illnesses that only she knows how to treat. A healer's duties do not pause for winter or comfort. Sam felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the February weather. And what does Ayana say about that? She will come. It is her duty. Swift Arrow's tone carried finality, but Sam noticed he didn't look at his sister as he spoke. Maybe that should be her choice to make? For the first time, Swift Arrow's composure showed a crack. Choice? The word came out sharp and bitter. Do you think we have many choices, Sam Mackenzie? Do you think my people choose to live scattered and hunted, moving from place to place like animals? Choice is a luxury for those with power. The truth of that statement hit Sam harder than he expected. He had been thinking about this situation from his own perspective. A man with land and resources and the legal protection that came with being white in a white man's territory. Swift Arrow was right. Choice was indeed a luxury, and one that Ayana's people had precious little of. I understand, Sam said quietly, but she's been safe here. She could continue to be safe here. Swift Arrow looked around at the ranch buildings. The well-fed cattle, the obvious prosperity that surrounded them. Safe, yes, but at what cost? She would be safe as long as she hides what she is, as long as she pretends to be something other than Comanche. The morning after Swift Arrow's arrival dawned gray and cold, with heavy clouds promising snow before nightfall. Sam had barely slept, spending most of the night pacing his porch and trying to come to terms with what seemed inevitable. Through his window, he could see the glow of the fire where Ayana sat talking with her brother and his warriors, their voices carrying softly on the still air as they shared stories and caught up on months of separation. Miguel found him there. As the sun struggled to break through the overcast sky, the foreman carried 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising like small prayers in the cold air. He handed one to Sam and leaned against the porch railing, both men looking out toward where the Comanche group had made their camp. Hard choice she's facing, Miguel said quietly, is it? Sam replied, his voice rougher than usual from lack of sleep. Seems like everyone's already decided for her. Maybe, or maybe she's been carrying this weight longer than any of us realized. Miguel sipped his coffee thoughtfully. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we know we have to make, even when we don't want to. Before Sam could respond, they heard horses approaching from the direction of town. A group of riders was moving fast toward the ranch, kicking up. A cloud of dust despite the damp ground. Sam counted at least 12 men, and his heart sank as he recognized several faces among them. Trouble, Miguel muttered, setting down his coffee cup. The riders included Sheriff Patterson, Mayor Henderson, and several other town officials, along with what looked like a hastily assembled posse of local men. Some carried rifles openly, while others had their hands resting on pistol grips. This wasn't a diplomatic mission. Swift Arrow and his warriors noticed the approaching group at the same time. Sam watched as they smoothly moved into defensive positions around their camp, their weapons remaining sheathed but clearly ready. Ayana stood between the 2 groups, her face pale but determined. Sheriff Patterson rode directly up to Sam's porch, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by official sternness. Morning, Sam. We heard you've got some visitors. Morning, Sheriff. Yes, Ayana's brother came looking for her. They'll be moving on soon enough. That's the problem, Mayor Henderson interjected, mopping his brow despite the cold weather. We can't have armed Comanche warriors just riding through our territory whenever they please. Sets a bad precedent. Sam stepped down from the porch, his full height and broad shoulders creating an imposing presence. They haven't threatened anyone or caused any trouble. They're just here to collect family. Armed savages are always trouble, called out Bill Morrison from the back of the group. Should have called for help the minute you spotted them. Sheriff Patterson raised his hand for quiet, though his own nervousness was obvious. Sam, I respect what you've done for that woman, but this situation is beyond what any one rancher should handle. We need to escort these Indians back to the reservation where they belong. And if they don't want to go? The sheriff's hand moved unconsciously toward his weapon. Then we'll have to make them understand that they don't have a choice in the matter. Sam felt the familiar anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. Losing his temper now wouldn't help anyone, least of all Ayana. Sheriff, these people haven't broken any laws. Swift Arrow came here looking for his sister, nothing more. The law says Indians need passes to travel off reservation land, Pastor Williams announced, having ridden up with the main group. Where? Are there travel documents? It was a trap, and everyone knew it. The territorial government required travel passes, but the process for obtaining them was deliberately complicated and often took months. Most Indian families who needed to travel for emergencies or family reasons simply couldn't wait for official permission. Sam was searching for a response when he heard footsteps behind him. Ayana had approached the porch, moving with the quiet grace that characterized all her actions. She looked at the assembled townspeople with the same calm assessment she had shown that first day at the depot. I will speak for my brother, she announced, her English clear and formal. Sheriff Patterson looked uncomfortable with this development. Dealing with a woman was awkward enough. Dealing with an Indian woman who spoke better English than some of his deputies was completely outside his experience. Ma'am, with respect, this is a matter for the men to handle. Ayana's slight smile held no warmth. The men seemed to be handling it poorly. Perhaps a different approach would be more successful. She stepped forward, positioning herself where both groups could see her clearly. My brother Swift Arrow leads a small band of people who were displaced during the cavalry operations last fall. They have been trying to reach the reservation, but winter made travel impossible. My brother came here only to collect me, so I can help care for orphan children who need healing. The explanation was simple and reasonable, but Sam could see that several of the townspeople weren't interested in reasonable. They had come expecting a confrontation, and some of them seemed disappointed to find a more complicated situation. That's a touching story, Bill Morrison called out, but how do we know they won't raid our ranches on their way out? Swift Arrow had been silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward and addressed the crowd in English that was heavily accented but perfectly clear. I am Swift Arrow. I speak for my people. We take nothing that is not ours. We harm no one who does not threaten us. We want only to collect my sister and continue to the reservation. Mayor Henderson leaned forward in his saddle. And how do we know you'll actually go to the reservation? How do we know this isn't some kind of trick? Because I give you my word, Swift Arrow replied simply. The word of a savage isn't worth much. Someone from the back of the group shouted. That was too much for Sam. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of commanding respect through actions rather than threats. That man's word is worth more than the promises of half the politicians in this territory, Sam declared. He traveled hundreds of miles to find his sister. He could have taken her and left without saying a word to anyone. Instead, he's standing here trying to do this the peaceful way. Sheriff Patterson shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He was a decent man at heart, but he was also an elected official who had to consider public opinion. Sam, I understand your position, but I have responsibilities to the community. People are scared. Then maybe people should be more scared of their own ignorance than of folks trying to live their lives in peace. The conversation might have continued in circles, but at that moment Dr. Hamilton arrived on his horse, having ridden hard to catch up with the posse. The elderly physician was breathing heavily as he dismounted, but his voice carried the authority of someone whose opinion was respected throughout the community. Sheriff, I hope you're not planning to do anything rash, Dr. Hamilton said, mopping his face with a handkerchief. I've been hearing rumors all morning about armed confrontations and forced removals. Doctor, we're just trying to handle a delicate situation, Mayor Henderson replied. By threatening a family reunion? Dr. Hamilton looked around the assembled group with obvious disapproval. That woman has helped more people in this community than most of us manage in a year. The least we can do is treat her family with basic courtesy. His words seemed to deflate some of the tension in the air. Dr. Hamilton's reputation for fairness and common Sense made it difficult for anyone to argue against his position openly. Swift Arrow took advantage of the moment to address the crowd. Again, we will leave today. Before the sun sets, we will be gone from your lands, this I promise. Sheriff Patterson looked around at the faces of his posse, reading the shift in mood. All right, you have until sunset. But I want your word that you'll head straight for the reservation. You have it. As the crowd began to disperse, Sam felt a hollow emptiness settling in his chest. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the larger problem remained unchanged. Liana would be leaving with her brother, and there was nothing he could do to change that reality. He found her later that afternoon, packing the last of her belongings while Swift Arrow and his warriors prepared their horses for travel. The snow had begun to fall, light flakes that danced in the wind and melted as soon as they touched the ground. I want to give you something, Sam said. Pulling a small wrapped package from his coat pocket, Ayana accepted it with surprise, carefully, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a delicate silver bracelet that had belonged to his mother. It was simple but beautiful, with an intricate pattern that caught the light as she turned it in her hands. Sam, this is too valuable. I cannot accept such a gift. My mother would have wanted you to have it. She always said jewelry should be worn by someone who understood its real value. Ayana slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The weight of everything they couldn't say hung in the air between them. Will you be safe? Sam asked finally. As safe as anyone can be in these times, and you? I'll manage, I always do. She stepped closer then, close enough that he could see the tears she was trying not to shed. Sam Mackenzie, you saved my life in more ways than you know. I will never forget your kindness. Before he could respond, she rose on her toes and kissed him gently.